On this episode of the Scott Stedman podcast, we will be looking at why Robert Downey Jr. Abruptly left his interview promoting the new Avengers movie, and really look at the concept of why people are so interested in our past. So stay tuned and listen right here on the Scott Stedman podcast. Good morning and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. It is April 23rd. Usually on Fridays I do my Film for Thought Fridays, but today we're not going to do a Film for Thought Friday. We're going to talk about something else that came across the news wire yesterday. It just seemed like over the news and even just over social media there was this blow up of Robert Downey Jr., who left an interview early because the interviewer was asking him some personal questions about his past. And right now I'm going to go ahead and play a segment of that interview for you to listen to.
And what do you think of the obvious parallels being made between you and Iron Man?
At this point, it's natural, but if you'd asked me in the first Iron Man, I'd be like, "That's me." And now I've realized that, of course, it's not. I'm not saying that I'm such a fantasist that I felt like I was Tony Stark, but I felt like it was my persona. But none of us are our personas.
But he's becoming a much more likable character as well, isn't he?
I suppose
so. A
so.
better man.
Yeah, he's becoming a better guy.
In a way that you are as well, I suppose.
Sure.
I mean, what I'd really like to ask you about a quote you gave to the New York Times, and I don't want to pry, so if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But what you said to the New York Times once was, it was after your incarceration, and you said you can't go from a $2,000 a night hotel suite to a penitentiary and understand it and come out a liberal. And I just wondered what you meant by that.
Well, the funny thing is, and I appreciate your point of view, things that you said 5-7 years ago or things you said in an interview that made sense to you at the time, I could pick that apart for 2 hours and be no closer to the truth than I'd be giving you some half-assed answer right now. I couldn't even really tell you what a liberal is. So therein lies the answer to your question.
The statement sort of stands by itself, doesn't it? I mean, does that mean you're not a liberal, or that you came out of prison not being a liberal?
Are we promoting a movie? To me, the thing is that I'm certainly not going to backpedal on anything I've said, but I wouldn't say I'm a Republican or a liberal or a Democrat. I think when I was talking to the person who was doing the interview that day, and that just happened to be my opinion. That's the nice thing, is you can have opinions and they kind of change and flow.
Yeah, well, that's life and that's growing older, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you say we're promoting an interview, promoting the movie. I mean, obviously you're doing a promotional round of interviews, and that's why we're talking about the movie. But we also want to talk a little bit about you, and I don't know how comfortable you are, talking about yourself at the moment.
You have as much time as anyone else will.
Yeah, well, okay, well then let me just ask you a few more questions and you can answer them if you want to and not if you don't want to. I mean,
so only got this much left anyway.
Well, I think we've got 3 more minutes on our agreement.
Your foot's starting to jump a little bit. You better get to your next question.
The reason I'm asking about the past is that you've talked in other interviews again about your relationship with your father and the role of all of that in the dark periods you entered and taking drugs and drinking and all of that. And I just wondered whether you think you're free of all of that, or whether that's still something...
I'm sorry, I really don't... what are we doing?
Well, I'm just asking questions, that's all.
Right.
Okay, that's okay.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
I'm sorry.
Take your mic.
It's okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you.
So,
You seem
You can watch the. I'll post the link on my website, and you can actually watch the full interview process. But at the beginning of the process, they're talking about the movie and actually really talking about the Iron Man character that Robert Downey Jr. portrays. And, things were going good. They're talking about Iron Man, and even if Robert Downey Jr. was a big comic book fanboy when he was younger, excuse me, and he kind of talked about that, talked a little bit about, how as an actor he played Iron Man and how different from how he portrayed Iron Man in the first movie to how he portrays Iron Man in the Avengers 2. And then all of a sudden, it started to shift a little bit to his personal life. It kind of started out a little bit about how Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr., what are the similarities and the differences between the two. And then you could see that he started to ask a little bit more personal questions about Robert Downey Jr.'s past. I can remember just, being a young kid and just seeing these movie trailers for Robert Downey Jr., and especially with movies like Chaplin and some of these other films around that time, like some early to mid 90s, he was on top of the world, and then you just saw how his life got out of control with drinking and drugs, and occasionally, you'd see him like in one of these movies, and you're like, oh, but it seemed like he is, his being on top of the mountain in Hollywood, he kind of got knocked off due to his own self-destructive tendencies, and yet we see like now with the Iron Man movies, and there's even some more different movies where he's actually on top again, and he's actually a better person now, or at least I think from what I see him do with his charity work and how he presents himself on screen and on interviews and even just other things, he has become a better person. That part of him, that dark period of his life, no longer defines him. But it's so interesting on how even though we can change our lives for the better, there's always going to be some people who always want to continue to drag us to the past, who always want to continue to talk about the horrible, wrong things we've done. I know in my personal life, even like growing up as a kid, even the dumb things or the way I would beat up my sister or my sister would beat up me, or how we get in the fights when we were like 12, 13, 14 years old. And even though now we're both in our 30s, even in family gatherings, there's always those conversations. And it's usually never done like with my sister going, hey, brother, you remember the one time when you did this horrible thing to me? It's never been presented like that. It's usually through my niece. I'll be sitting and I'll be playing with my niece, and then my niece goes, hey, Uncle Scotty, and I go, yes, Brianna, and she'll go, how come you did this to mommy, or how come you did that to my mommy? And in a way, I'm kind of annoyed by it, because it's almost like, that's not who I am anymore. It's not like I'm this 30-year-old man who's going to continue to pull the juvenile pranks that I pulled on my sister back when I was 13, 14 years old. And it's just like, there's always something that always wants to stick us to the bad parts of our past, and we can never see us for who we are now, when we've made so many changes, when we made progress to better ourselves. And I think that's just part of the human condition sometimes, that we always continue to look at the bad instead of the good of people. I mean, if you think about our media and even with our news, it's always here's all these bad things, and then there's like this little corp of something positive that's happening in the world or in the community, and it's always like bad, 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 bad. So you're always kind of always focusing on the bad. Like even like I can even think of like now like even like with someone like Britney Spears who now is doing like a Las Vegas show and has very successful and she's doing all these great things and she's taking care of her kids and she's just living her life, and yet people always want to kind of bring up, oh yeah, remember when she shaved her head and did all these crazy things? Yeah, I remember those. I remember seeing the pictures of a bald Britney Spears. Who doesn't? But why do we have to continue to go back to the dark moments in people's lives to define them instead of what they're doing currently now in the positive light? And I think that's one of the reasons why Robert Downey Jr. just got up from the interview, because because the things that happened in his past, the relationship that he's had with his father, those are things that are in the past, and let's leave the past in the past, and let's talk about the movie. Let's talk about, if you want to talk about stuff in his personal life, talk about some of the good things he's doing now. Or I remember seeing a video where he went and saw this kid who lost his arm, and some guy made like a Iron Man robotic arm for that kid as a prosthetic, and Robert Downey Jr. was there to give this Iron Man prosthetic arm to this kid who lost his arm to cancer. Let's talk about this. Let's not talk about stuff that happened in the 90s or even talk about stuff that happened in his childhood. So in a way, I'm actually glad that he left the interview, because it was getting to a place that he didn't want to be in, a place he didn't feel comfortable being in. And I also have to give him props. The way he exited the interview, you could tell by his body language that he was annoyed, and I'm sure it probably took every fiber in his being to not have a blow up, because then if he blew up, then that's going to be all over the news that, Robert Downey Jr. blew up at a reporter and blah, 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 and make him look like the villain. But here it actually, even though it's kind of spun to make him look like, oh, well, he got up from an interview. What do you think? Should he have done it? Should he not have done it? At least it seems like, according to what I see on the news and even what I see on social media, everyone's applauding him for getting up and going and leaving that interview. And, I applaud him too. He should have left that interview because, again, it was a really odd interview to begin with, and apparently that interviewer has made other people mad, especially like the most famous one was Quentin Tarantino, how Quentin Tarantino walked out and actually yelled at the guy. So I say all this to help us remember that when we see somebody, or maybe we have someone in our own family or our own coworkers, let's continue to look at people for who they really are right now. And if you've known somebody who has had like a shady past or even a dark past or even a struggling past and they have bettered themselves up now, then don't be so fixated on the past. Continue to praise them for the advancements and the better of their life that they're doing right now currently. And that's all I have to say about that. And that's all the time that I have today. So again, thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. I appreciate all of you who listen to my ramblings. Actually, if you are near the Stanton, Virginia area or in the close vicinities, actually next Saturday, May 2nd, I will be taking out a group of members from my church to go see the Avengers 2 at the Regal Cinemas out in Harrisonburg. So if you are in the Virginia area and you want to go and see the Avengers movie with me, and even afterwards we're going to actually have a discussion. So it almost will be like a film for thought discussion, except it's not going to be through the podcast. It'll actually be live and in person with me. Maybe I can sneak a recorder into whatever restaurant is and maybe record that, but with the clanking dishes and plates and cups, it may not be good audio, so I may just have to rehash everything next week. So again, if you are interested in seeing the movie, just meet me out there. We're going to be seeing the 6:30 showing out there at the Harrisonburg Regal Theater out there off of University Boulevard in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So again, if you'd like to come and see that movie with me, that would be great. All right. Well, I hope you all are having a great week, and I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.